In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos post-game reaction podcast brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name's Ben Grant, not joined by anybody today. This is a bit of a weird one. I'm stuck on a boat on a lake. It's a long story, but I'm not able to get in touch with JB. I'm hoping there'll be an opportunity to upload this at some point. But what a tight football game. The Argos end up hanging on to it, hanging on for dear life at the end. I think probably Argos fans that have been through this many times before were getting a little bit white-knuckled at the end there, but they do hang on. 24-19 is the final. And basically the story of this one is the Argos got out, they got out to an early lead. It really should have been put away in the first half. And I think that you go back and look at some of the stats, even like looking at the halftime stats. At halftime, neither team could run the ball at all. So Argos had 24 yards rushing. The REDBLACKS had 18 yards rushing, but the REDBLACKS couldn't move it through the air either. Arbuckle at half, 8 of 19 for 90 yards and an interception. McLeod Bethel Thompson, meanwhile, was moving very effectively, 18 of 24 for 238. And so you look at those stats, and it really should have been a huge lead for the Argos, but instead it was only 13-6. And then the second half, things changed a little bit. The third quarter, the Argos kind of started to pull away, built up a 24-9 lead. And then as we got to the fourth, Arbuckle started to heat up. Some of the injuries that the Argos suffered throughout the course of the game started to take their toll. And it looked like exhaustion started kicking in a little bit too. So guys that were out there playing that usually are rotational pieces that don't usually, play start to finish, suddenly were having to play full quarters, filling in for injured guys, and they just weren't able to sustain that same level of energy. So the REDBLACKS came firing back at the end, and man, it got close, but they managed to hang on. So the Argos do win the game. I'm going to go through it. We'll break down sort of quarter by quarter as I go chronologically through it and bring up some of the talking points that I've jotted down here. And I ask for you to forgive me for any weird boat noises I've got going on here. It's not these are not ideal conditions for podcast recording, but I don't know. I've recorded in a bar in Quebec City. This can't possibly be more difficult than that. So we'll give this a go. All right, so at the start, really interesting to see off the top, a lot of the game plans that JB and I talked about in preparing for this week seem to be what both teams were interested in doing. So Ottawa, we talked about them needing to really spread the ball around, not just focus on one side of the field, as is often what happens with Nick Arbuckle. And right away, I saw the first couple of passes over to the right side, and I thought, here we go again. But after that, he did start spreading it around. And one of Toronto's game plans that I had offensively was taking deep shots, and that's how Toronto opened the game. And the reason you do this, not just because you can connect on these, and McLeod Bethel Thompson did connect on one of his two first deep shots on that first drive. The reason you do this is not just because it's there, not just because Ottawa's playing man coverage and you can beat them for a touchdown, but because it forces them to back up a little bit. Unfortunately, they couldn't complete those deep balls with enough regularity to get Ottawa to completely check out of their game plan. That just never really happened. They came in with basically the same defensive plan they did last time, which worked incredibly well last time. We remember it launched this series of 5 games where everybody was playing man defense against the Argonauts and basically forcing them to pass. That's what Ottawa came in here doing. They were not going to allow Toronto to run the ball, and Toronto really couldn't. And you give it to, like, AJ Ouellette gave everything he had, but you can't. You just can't run against that many guys in the box when you don't have a dominant running attack, when you don't have offensive linemen who can bully players around and run right over them. And that's not what the Argos have. Remember, they're still missing Nicastro, they're missing Tate, they're missing Cage, and the guys they've got in there are doing their best. They were missing Allen at the halfway point of this game. It's thin. We know that. And Ottawa is basically playing on that and saying, you can throw over 300 yards, but that's not going to win you the football game. And the reason it doesn't is that if you're going to throw and only throw, your completion percentage has to be well over 80 to make that work. Because in 3-down football, even if you're completing at a high percentage, which McLeod Bethel Thompson was, he was throwing at 70%. That's great. Over the course of a season, 70% completions is awesome. But if you don't have a running game to back that up, then 70 doesn't really mean that much. It usually means a lot of field goals, and that's what we've seen a lot of from Toronto this season. So that first drive ends up resulting in a Boris Bede field goal, 51 yards, I think that one was. And that was Bede's 200th career CFL field goal, which is pretty awesome. I was set up by a really nice long completion to Kurleigh Gittens Jr., who had a heck of a game. And after being quiet for, it's not quite a month, but he hasn't had one of those dominant games like we've seen him have before in a while. This was a really nice one to see. So, yeah, love Kurleigh Gittens today. 8 completions to Kurleigh Gittens Jr. for 161 and a touchdown. And a touchdown that he's so badly wanted, where he reached out with everything he had to get that ball in the end zone. So, yeah, Kurleigh started off well. You know, Bede nails that 51-yarder. Toronto's rolling, but, yeah, 3-0. We've seen that before. The Ottawa offense, once they took the field, they were under a tremendous amount of pressure without Toronto sending heat. But the issue with this is that's really hard to sustain. So Oakman got in there early for a sack. It ended up being flagged, and I had a problem with this one. It got called for roughing the passer. It looks so light. It is extremely difficult when you were sacking a quarterback in the position that both of those players were in, you know, not to do something that you could kind of look back and say, well, you know, maybe he fell on him this way. Maybe he did kind of graze the face mask as he went by, or, you know, maybe his hand got behind the jersey as he went by. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. You got two guys basically wrestling to the ground. Everything's happening in a split second. And, you know, the result was he got flagged for it. I didn't care for it. And I thought later on in the game, when Toronto challenged that very same play, McLeod looked like he may have been horse-collared to the ground on a sack by Malden. They challenged that, and it's the same thing where I wouldn't have called that one either. I think both were not penalties, but unfortunately, Toronto was on the wrong side of both of those challenges. So Toronto gets the ball back. And right away, it's not looking like running's an option. They had rushed for like -2, and they didn't even try to rush after that for a while. It wasn't until they got down near the goal line where they decided that they were going to give the running attack another go. But a beautiful play beautiful series by Toronto to end that first quarter that finished off with a touchdown. I want to go back to a couple of things that happened there. So there was a really nice jet to Gittens Jr. for 20 yards. And what I liked about this play design is that we haven't really seen this kind of backfield action before. Often when you have a player coming across on a jet, which happens a lot, that's a big part of Coach Dinwiddie's offense, usually you don't have the running back staying in there and then taking a fake handoff after that. Either the running back is leading that jet out, or they're on the other side of the ball going the other way, or they've stepped up in advance and taken the fake first. I don't think I've seen them run it that way. And it caught Ottawa by surprise because it's not in accordance with the film that they've been studying. So Gittens comes across, and the linebackers all freeze because Ouellette is steadfast in the backfield, and then he takes a fake. The ball's already gone, but the linebackers are all focused in on Ouellette and that sort of counter look. Gittens, meanwhile, has only a DB to beat to the outside, and he's able to pick up 20. So really nice design. And then when, you know, just to make that full series complete, Kelly's in on a 3rd and 1. He gets his yard, and that's turning into a pretty successful package. They did get flagged on that, but I'm glad they sorted it out. The reason they got flagged on that 3rd and 1, you could see the anger from the Toronto sideline because Theron Churchill was playing tight end on that spot. And whenever they send in their heavies, remember, they don't have any tight ends on the roster right now. Neither Declan Cross or Joe Carbone was able to go. And so when they send in that heavy package, Theron Churchill is playing a tight end. And so he has to declare eligible. He, as number 51, has to, when he goes out onto the field, he has to tell the referees, I'm eligible on this play. So that when he lines up as a tight end, they know that that's not an illegal formation. They know that's not a tackle. That's an eligible receiver. And so he did that on this play, but I guess the referee that threw the flag didn't hear that get communicated. It was communicated, fortunately, to someone, and so they were able to pick up that flag. And then Coxie had such a huge highlight reel play. And it was kind of an up and down game for him. He had real moments, and this was one of them. I feel like it was 2nd down and 10 in this situation. And Bethel Thompson guns it out to Coxie, who catches it after about an 8 or 9 yard gain, and he just gets walloped right as soon as he catches the ball. Not only does he hold his ground and shed the tackle, he then stiff arms another defender to the ground, gets 5 more yards, stiff arms another defender to the ground, and turns the corner. He almost gets into the end zone. I actually thought he scored, but his foot just stepped out of bounds at the 2 yard line. That was an amazing play. That was, again, another sign that things are rolling. This Argos team is just going to steamroll the REDBLACKS today. I felt, honestly, at that point, that this might be one of those 36-7 games, something like that. And of course, obviously it wasn't. I should know better probably by now. And then we get the dreaded 1st and goal from the 2 situation that we've seen the Argos struggle with, to be kind. And on that first play, I was thinking, oh no, here we go. I can't wait to go on Twitter and see what people think of that first play call. 1st and goal from the 2, and they dial up. It was either quads or quins. I didn't see the formation, but they only had one receiver to the left, and it was an extra offensive lineman eligible as a tight end. They end up throwing a corner route to the right side, right into the corner of the end zone. It's just not a high percentage play. I know, like, JB absolutely hates fades and corners when you're on the goal line. I get it. The space is open. I don't mind taking a shot there, but it's just it's not really a conventional thing. You have to have seen something or really believe strongly based on film that that's going to be there. It wasn't open. The ball was overthrown. And then on 2nd down and goal from the 2, this is a huge pressure down, because if they don't get it, I think based on what we saw from Dinwiddie today, he might have actually gone for it, 3rd down and goal for the 2, but they've been so bad in those situations. I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to see it come up. So 2nd down and goal from the 2, they give it to Ouellette. He makes a fantastic cutback and did essentially everything that stood out on his pro day going back a few years. All of the athleticism that he had, from the balance to the acceleration, the change of direction, the power, the strength. That 2 yard run, he used all of it. If this was a Madden game, he pushed every single button trying to get into the end zone and willed his way in there, because the blocking wasn't there. It didn't hold up. Guys got through. It's so tough down there on the goal line. Everyone was coming. But what I like about the situation is that if that's on 1st down, he doesn't get through. If they run that ball on 1st down, that does get stuffed. There's a brief hesitation when you run it on 2nd now, because they don't think the Argos are going to do it. They do think the Argos are running that on 1st down. I guess that's why they sort of reversed their tendency and threw for the corner. But on 2nd down, I think everybody at TD Place was thinking this is a pass. I was thinking this was a pass. I thought we were probably going to see motion and then a swing out to Ambles or Gittens Jr., like one of those that we've seen before. And instead, no, they give it to Ouellette, and it's the right call. He gets in. But again, tip of the hat to Coach Dinwiddie, just for being different. I thought he called some plays today that were very unlike what I feel at times may have been kind of a pattern that he's fallen into. And so he's been doing some self-film study, clearly, and he's trying to go against some of his tendencies. So, yeah, end of the quarter, it's 10-0 Argos. And it just felt like at that point, if they could put another score in there, Ottawa just didn't look like they had it. Their game plan needed the running game to be successful. They were trying to throw sort of, left, right, center, but short. And again, just like I was saying before with McLeod Bethel Thompson, if you've got no running game at all, you're just not going to make your way down the field like that, because all it takes, if you're throwing for 6 and 7 yard chunks, it just takes one incompletion and now you're punting the ball away. And that's what was happening to Ottawa early on. And then there was a moment where I really felt like this this was going to put the game away. The entire series started off looking good, looking different. Hadel with a return. Hadel showed some stuff today. Now, he had a great return. We got called for an illegal block, so that ended up backing it up. But there was actually space, and there was only one guy he needed to make miss, which he did. And then suddenly all sorts of room opened up, and it was a great return for the first time in a long time. We were like, wow, the Argonauts are in business on a punt return. But it was called back. However, it did feel like there was, maybe something different happening. And then Maurice Carnell ends up intercepting Nick Arbuckle on another play that, again, I want to give Carnell credit. He's dropped a couple picks. He wasn't going to drop this one today. But what I love about this is something I was saying in a film session a few weeks ago. Carnell has so much faith in his judgment of the ball. He knows it, again, we can criticize his hands for having dropped a couple picks, and there was one that was taken away from him for an Amos penalty. But that is a defensive player who judges the ball in the air like a receiver. He knows exactly where that ball is coming down. And on that play, he's got Acklin in front of him, and they're really trying to force feed Acklin. And Carnell's watching the ball come in, and like I said a few weeks ago, he knows. He's like, I know where this ball is going. I'm not going to close in on Acklin. I'm going to trust my eyes and just stay right here. The ball's coming right to me. He does that. He picks it off. And then they bust out the sudden change, which I love. This is an old school offensive psychology technique. After a turnover, the theory is that you should go deep. After a turnover, sudden change is like very first offensive play, go deep, try and catch the DBs, just kind of dragging, not in it. They're suddenly back out on the field. They're mad at the offense for turning the ball over, and suddenly they take advantage of for a deep touchdown. So they go deep for Banks on the sudden change, and they get the PI call, which was light. It was challenged and it stood, but it was. Oh no, sorry. The challenge flag was picked up when the referee gave Coach Lapalisse more information, whatever that means. And so, I think the only reason I might be angry at that is if they were saying you can't challenge illegal contact here, because that's something that Coach Dinwiddie wanted to do a few weeks ago and wasn't allowed to pick up his flag again. So I'm hoping that's not what the situation was, but not being at TD Place today, I wasn't able to ask them after the game about that. So I haven't seen the post-game press conferences or anything like that. So I've got some catching up to do in terms of finding out what was going on in that play. And then right after that, there's a bomb to Gittens Jr. Bethel Thompson just standing in there, holding his ground. He took so many shots today, not just on the plays where he was sacked by Malden and the rest of the defensive line, but he released the ball at the last possible second on 5 or 6 occasions. This was another one of those on that bomb to Gittens Jr. And then, Allen ends up getting injured. Richards comes in for Allen. And it's not an ideal matchup. I'm a Shane Richards fan. I really like him at right tackle. To go in the game cold at right tackle against Malden is not something anybody wants to do. If he's got a week of prep, he knows he's starting. This is going to be his situation. Remember, this isn't like he only thinks he's going to be going in to play right tackle. He's been playing the guard spots. He's been playing left. He's been playing right. He's all over the place. If he spends the whole week knowing I'm starting at right guard, I promise you he looks better than how he looked today. It wasn't a terrific day for him, and really the game changed for the Argos after that substitution. There were other reasons. That's not the reason that this game changed. There were other things going on, but it did sort of start it. They're in field goal range there. 3rd and 3 from the Ottawa 5, and Coach Dinwiddie leaves the offense on the field. I actually thought he was going to go for it. We've seen this many times before. The simulated snap count, trying to draw the defense offside. It never works. I'm really not a fan of that. Especially if you have to burn a timeout in the CFL, I'm especially not a fan of that. I'd rather take the 5-yard penalty. But really, I just want to send the field. If you're not gonna kick it, and you're gonna go for it, great. Send your guys out there, go for it. If you are gonna kick it, just make that decision from the beginning. I just felt the way it was handled with the kicking team being sent out and then the offense being sent back on. It felt like as soon as that happened, you're like, oh, okay, well, they're not actually running a play. If they were going to go for it, then you have the confidence to go for it right from the beginning. The fact that they sent everyone on and off meant that something was up. Someone said, hey, well, let's at least try to draw them offside. And the coaches went for it. But they end up not jumping offside because it never happens. A field goal makes it 13-0 Argos. And I guess this is the point where I started kind of worrying, because I looked at the numbers at that stage, and they're basically what I read off to you as the halftime stats. There's still time left in this half, but at 13-0, it did not feel at all like the Red Blacks belonged in this game, and yet they're only a touchdown away from being right back in it, from being a touchdown from winning it. And so we've seen that happen before with the Argos this season and last season, where there's so many field goals as part of the scoring because of the lack of consistent rushing attack that teams do stick around. We remember the East Final. I don't want to have to bring you back to that, but the Argos dominated in every possible way. They just could not score a touchdown to save their lives. It was a 16-0 or something like that at the half. And if one of those is a touchdown, it's an entirely different game. That's what we kind of felt like here. One was a touchdown here, but 13-0 at this point, the way the numbers looked, because at that stage of the game, Arbuckle didn't even have, I don't think he even had 30 yards passing at that stage. He ends up putting two nice drives together at the end of the half. Muamba gets hurt on the first one, and that was the second big blow that the Argos took, because you can't replace Enoch Muamba. There's not just nobody on the Toronto roster that can come in and just go and beat Enoch Muamba. There's not a lot of guys around the league, if any, who can just get in there and beat Enoch Muamba. And they tried, and you have to tip your hat to Trevor Hoyt, to Jack Cassar. I thought they both played admirably, and Cassar may have had the tackle of the game down near the end. He made a play near the end of the game that might have saved the Argos that win. But in terms of working their way through the end of the end of the second, the third quarter, the fourth quarter, they're not Enoch Muamba. It's not the same guy. And after that injury, you notice that's when suddenly Ottawa was able to run the football successfully. And once they were able to run the football, now that changes your defensive plan. Just taking one guy out like that, Enoch Muamba is such a big piece. He comes out, now they can run, and now that they can run, you have to adjust, and now they can pass. Fortunately, they weren't able to score a major, but they cashed in two field goals at the end. It's 13-6. And then the Argos missed on an opportunity that I really felt was going to happen. At the very end of the half, they played that time management beautifully. And I want to give another shout out to Curly Gittens Jr., who had the game of his life. They're running out of time. They've got like 5 seconds on the clock. And they're out of field goal range. They're right at midfield, and you can't kick a 62-yarder to end the half. We've seen that. We've seen that. That's not a good plan. And so they throw a quick ball on all hooks. They throw it to Gittens Jr. He has the wherewithal to immediately hit the deck and to signal to the officials that he's giving himself up. Because obviously Ottawa is not coming in to touch him. They don't want to ground him. They want that clock to go to 0 before they touch him. So he catches that ball after like a 5 or 6 yard pass, hits the deck, and starts banging the turf and looking at the officials to let them know, I'm giving myself up. I'm down. They blow the whistle. There's time for one more play. Boris Bede marches out there, and he just misses. 51-yarder. You don't see Boris Bede miss a lot. And it says something when your kicker misses a 51-yard field goal and you think, oh, that's weird. What's wrong? What's wrong is you. What's wrong is the person thinking that. And so that's me. Because right in that scenario, I'm like, what's wrong with Beatty missing a 51-yard field goal like that? Well, that's ridiculous, obviously. And he did miss a couple today, but these are monster field goals. He also hit 2 51-yard field goals. He misses a 51, misses a 46. Beatty is hugely reliable. Remember, coming into last week, he'd hit 12 in a row. But it was extremely windy at TD Place. It was swirling all over the place, and those are bombs. So you don't blame Beatty on that one, but man, that would have been nice to go in and take that momentum back away, to go in to halftime up 10 instead of up just a touchdown. It was making me a little bit nervous. Like I said, it didn't go away at half, and then you're nursing all of these injuries. And then to start the third quarter, doesn't Banks go and get injured? And he was having a bit of a game too, not the way that Curly Gittens Jr. was, but he was certainly heavily involved in the game plan. And so he takes a short pass, is able to make a really nice move. He gets face masked to the ground, and it looked like, it was hard to see exactly what happened, even on the replay. It looked like he might have reached out his hand to brace his fall, and that's something that you never want to do. Anyone who snowboards either has or knows someone who has broken their wrist trying to brace their fall. It's the exact same thing. You're going to the ground, instinctively you reach out, and the wrist always goes. You could see on that one, at least, he got up flexing his hand, holding his wrist, but shaking it off, and that's not something you do with a broken wrist. So I felt like he'd be back in the game, and he was. But there was a chance on, I'm just checking my notes here. It's like 2 plays later. DeMonte Coxey missed an opportunity for a touchdown on a deep ball, and it might not have looked like it on your screen. But this was kind of like we talked about last week. You remember, I'll bring you back in time to last week, the interception that McLeod Bethel-Thompson threw in the end zone, where it just seemed like he launched a deep ball to nobody. And when they looked at the replay, it looked like, I think it was Curly Gittens Jr. who had pulled up on a hook instead of carrying it out, and that was an option route. That looked like this was the exact same option route. And again, the rule on that is this: at whatever yard line it is, every team runs it a little bit differently, but let's say we're talking about 10 yards. After 10 yards, if you have not made up the cushion that your DB has given you, and your DB is still off you, if there's still a cushion, then you dig your feet into the ground and you come back for that hook. If you have made up, if you are even or ahead of your defender, then you go. It's the old expression, if you're even, you're leaving. That's what happened on that play. Coxey had man coverage, as they saw so much of this game. He made up the ground by that 10-yard point. He was even beyond his DB, and then he jammed on the brakes and came back on a hook. Bethel-Thompson read it the way I did and aired it out. And Coxey had a step. If he had kept going to the end zone, it's hard to say how this lines up, but it looked like a pretty good ball from Bethel-Thompson. That may have been 6. Instead, they end up having to settle for a 51-yard field goal. Boris Beatty makes it 16-6. And then it got really slow for the rest of the third quarter. It was a lot of Bethel-Thompson getting just hit hard, getting sacked. The REDBLACKS sort of scraping away yardage. They added a field goal to make it 16-9. And then Bethel-Thompson, after getting hit again in the red zone, takes a sack to bring them what I thought might have been out of field goal range. It was a tough one. This ended up being, I think it was 46. So you send Beatty out there, but yeah, he just pushed it a little bit to the right. They at least get the single. The nice thing about Beatty missing, not a lot of kickers in the league miss a 46-yard field goal and have it sail out of the end zone for the automatic rouge. And that makes it 17-9 at that point. And then Arbuckle actually hit a bomb. The defense started to show some vulnerability deep, which they really haven't. They were having some trouble in the seams, and this again comes from the adjusted game plan from Enoch Mwamba being out. Everything changes on defense, and suddenly they're not dropping the same way that they were before. Suddenly, guys in deep third are sticking a little bit more to the sidelines because the guys in flats are having to press a bit more. They're having to come in and be run stoppers. Guys that have corners, that have flats responsibility, are getting involved in the run plays, and so that does affect how deep coverage works. When you're not worried about that, when your linebackers are cleaning up all the run plays, then you can sit back in your flat zone, you can sit back in your deep third, your deep middle, and just do your job. But what you had on that drive, and really for a lot of the rest of the game, was DBs who have been playing so well together starting to look to do the job of other people. And you had open seams. So Arbuckle hits that deep bomb. They don't get any points out of that drive because their field goal hit the uprights, which is one of the most unfair things in CFL football. I was perfectly fine with it at the time, but there are so many ways to get points kicking the football in the CFL, and it's just weird to think that if you miss a field goal by like 10 yards to the right, that you can get a single on that. But if you absolutely drill the upright, which means you were really close to getting the 3, that's not a single. I kind of feel again, I'm torn on this because I know the argument against the Rouge is that you're rewarding what people call failure, either a punt that goes into the end zone, which is, you're not trying to get it to, or a field goal that misses. But you also kind of have to look at it as a special teams play, at the ability to get the ball out of the end zone, or or the ability to tackle somebody in the end zone, or to kick it through. There is sort of a skill there, but it doesn't feel like it when you're not rewarded a point for hitting the upright. So yeah, every time I see that happen, I think, man, that kicker just misses a little worse. That's a single, and that was the case there. Should have been a single. It's not. So the score stays 17-19, and then the drive of the game happens, and it's from here that we're also going to find the play of the game when I recap that. This was a tear, and it was so badly needed. The Argos up 8. Ottawa clearly able to move the football now. The Argos defense reeling a little bit, and Bethel Thompson goes 5 for 5 for 83 yards and a touchdown. And it was a touchdown to Curly Gittens Jr., where I talked about this one off the top of the show, where he did everything he could to get in the end zone. He was not going to risk being a yard short, and having to go out there with quarterback sneaks. It was a fantastic drive. Bethel Thompson spread it around. He hit 4 different receivers and 5 passes, 83 yards, no incompletions on that. And they didn't. I think there was one QB sneak in the middle of that, but there weren't any called running plays because it became like throwing a play away. The Argos were rushing so poorly for most of the game that even with Ouellette punishing people, they just weren't rushing for enough yardage to justify it. Ouellette finished the day with 10 carries for 29 yards, so 2.9 yards a carry. When that's what your lead rusher is, well, the lead rusher is actually Bethel Thompson with 2 carries for 11 yards. But when your lead back can't even average 3 yards a carry, and again, no fault of Ouellette, that's not on him. It just wasn't there. The REDBLACKS were going all out to shut down the run, and the Argos couldn't run block through that. And so you have to do what Coach Dinwiddie did on that golden drive. You just say, you know what, let's not run the football anymore. Let's just pass it. And that's how that third quarter ended. It was huge to finish that quarter 24-9 at that point. I was a little more comfortable, but you never know. It's the CFL, and of course Arbuckle was moving the ball here, but it felt like this was now back in a little bit more of a comfort zone for the Argos. So 24-9 heading to the fourth. The real difference that you saw in the fourth quarter, all that pressure that Toronto was able to generate with a 4-man rush early in the game wasn't there anymore. I know Arbuckle took a couple sacks late. He took an intentional grounding penalty late, but those weren't immediate. He had time. He had time to find receivers. It was only the good coverage of the linebackers and the DBs dropping 8 into coverage that led to those sacks, those knockdowns, that intentional grounding penalty. It was terrific play from everybody else, but they were not getting home. That line was exhausted. They lost Shane Ray early on. That's another one that I didn't talk about. That happened really early in the game. Shane Ray, it just looked like the kind of injury you don't want to see. Anytime it doesn't look like much happened on the play, and a player with very little contact goes down holding their knee, you hold your breath. And I hope he's okay. I haven't seen a report on that, but it would be a huge loss. Ray is good for several highlights a game and is constantly in the minds of the tackles that he's going against. Those so many left tackles that we've seen over the last few weeks have just been absolutely diced up by Shane Ray. And I know he doesn't, it's not like that on every single play, but several times a game you get that burst, and it was missing. And so without him, trying to close out that game, you just didn't have that player stepping up and coming through. And as well as Brendan Barlow has played, and as good as that defensive line has been, Sam Acheampong had some really nice plays in there as well. That honestly, the whole defensive line played well, but there was nobody that had Arbuckle on the run in that fourth quarter. And that's something that we saw from early on from CN Power. I felt like Oakman got, we talked about him getting hosed a little bit on that roughing the passer penalty, but he followed it up with another sack. Like 2 plays later, he was in there with a sack when the guard in front of him didn't even touch him. You've got a defensive tackle who goes untouched when there's no missed block. It was just a whiff. It wasn't like a missed assignment. Because usually if a defensive tackle gets through clean for a sack, it usually means someone messed up their assignment. There was no messed up assignment on Oakman's sack, but by the end of the game, nobody's got any gas left because you don't have the rotation that you did before. And the Argos weren't really sending those 3-man rushes as frequently as they did before, so they weren't even rotating that way. So that defensive line down near the end of the game, you could see just how gassed they were. And that's why, in combination with losing Muamba, the defense just looked like a whole different team. They played so well in that first quarter and a half. And then down the stretch, like I said, they were doing their best, but it wasn't quite the same team. A bit of a rough play from Bethel Thompson as they're trying to kill clock. He ends up getting picked off. He goes deep. He had Daniels wide open. You've got to be so much more careful on a play like this. So I just want to describe this so you know what Bethel Thompson was seeing. This would have probably just about put the game away because it would have had them in Ottawa's territory at that point. Daniels is lined up to McLeod Bethel Thompson's right in the slot. They're running verticals. It looked like 4 verticals, and there was a huge seam that Daniels was in. He was wide open. Bethel Thompson saw it late and threw it late. If he throws that earlier, Daniels is not only wide open for the catch, but actually has enough space that may go. He throws it late enough that both the deep third and deep middle are able to converge on that. And verticals can be a nightmare against cover 3, but they had enough time to be able to adjust. I don't know if there was... I'd be making an excuse to say wind was a factor because I didn't see it. I know it was windy, it was swirly. It didn't look like the wind held up the football on that. It looked like it was just thrown too late, and he's got to throw that earlier, put as much zip on it as you can, keep that ball low, because the more travel time for the football in there, the more chance it's going to get picked off. So it does get picked off. Fortunately for the Argos, Ottawa's only able to turn that into a field goal. But yeah, it got dicey. They got down there again. They had a chance, and yeah, Kassar made a really nice play late to blow up Ottawa's chances. So probably could have gone either way at the end. Probably should have been an Argos blowout, but that's the CFL for you. It ends up being a pretty exciting football game. And there are moments of this game that weren't great. There were stretches in the third where you're just like, what's going on here? Where it's 2 and out after 2 and out after 2 and out, and not the kind that were necessarily generated by great defensive play. So yeah, I was really happy for the Argos that they were able to pull that off in the end, because this would have been a really tough one to swallow had they blown that late. But yeah, they do come away with it. Looking at the box scores, Bethel Thompson finishes the day throwing just under 70%. He was 27 for 39 for 365, a touchdown and an interception. Those sound like great stats, but like I said before, unless you are completing 80-85%, if you're doing what Nathan Rourke was doing to start the year, then you don't need a running game. But if you are not, if you're throwing 70-75% even completions, it's not going to do it. You've got to have the support, and it just wasn't there. The Argos finished the day with 43 yards rushing on 14 carries. They do get the rushing touchdown, which I know has been elusive. They've had a couple, though. They had the Banks one off that weird play last week, a couple others earlier in the season, but yeah, it was nice to see Ouellette get in for the touchdown, even though he had a pretty rough day carrying the football. But he was a pretty useful receiver. That was where Bethel Thompson really did a nice job of spreading it around. Gittens Jr. was his main guy with the 8 catches, 161 and the touchdown, but 3 catches for Coxie, 6 catches for Banks. And those weren't all just like little dump offs. He got downfield a little bit. He made some nice plays today too. Deveris had 4 for 36. And Ouellette had 4 catches for 26, and a couple of those were really big first downs. Ambles, the 2 catches for 25. So just being able to spread it around to 6 different receivers, that's what you want to see. But like I've said many times, and I know I'm going over the top on this now, but there needs to be a running game. They've got to find a way. They cannot go forward like this, even as well as the defense is playing. Because like they played really well for most of this game today. We don't know how long Enoch Mwamba's going to be out. They said upper body injury. It looked like back to me, but what do I know? Who knows? Like if this is several weeks, then maybe the defense is going to look a little bit like how the defense looked in the second half today. And teams that are a lot better than the Ottawa REDBLACKS are going to punish you for that. And if you can't run the football on the other side, it's amazing what a difference it makes. It's really incredible because it's all of those touchdowns are now field goals instead. That's the difference. That's what that means. When you can't run the football, it means you're kicking a lot of field goals. Boris Bede, 3 for 5 for field goals. His misses were both long ones. You would love to see him go 4 for 5, but it's hard in swirling winds to blame someone for missing a 46 or 51 yarder. Defensively, it was mostly like Mechie and Wyndham McManus. Wyndham McManus with 8 tackles. Mechie was playing up a lot at the end of the game today. He was really pressing, and he came up and made some really nice physical plays. That's not something that you get to see Mechie do in the style of defense that the Argos play. They play so much zone where he's playing deep middle. Regardless of what the coverage is, he's almost always got a deep zone. So he doesn't typically have a lot of tackles on his stat sheet. He's not usually involved in a lot of plays where he's coming up and making hits, but he punished a couple guys today. So that was kind of cool to just see that in him. And it will give teams something to think about. They've run, on the film study I did last week, I illustrated a sort of, it was kind of like a bit of a Tampa 2 look. That they ran where the safety came right down almost into the box. And having Mechie do that, showing that he could do that today, if you're looking for some support for Hoyt and Cassar, you think about how the middle of the field works. If you've got one of those guys playing the MAC, playing Enoch Mwamba's spot, and you don't want them thinking about pass coverage because you want them shutting down the run, well, that's a great way to solve that. And that's essentially what the Argos did. They walked Mechie down a little bit and had him kind of taking care of that underneath hole, taking care of that space in behind where Cassar and Hoyt would start off from. So it was pretty cool to see him step up and take that on today. All right, plays of the game, players of the game and play of the game. So players of the game is really easy for me. Offensively, this is Curly Gittens Jr. This is just a no-brainer. I've gone through his stats already a couple times today. But yeah, an amazing return home game for Curly Gittens Jr. As he finishes up with 8 catches, 161, including a 55-yarder in there. A 45-yarder in there. And averaging 20 yards a catch with a touchdown. That's just a huge day, and a day where Bethel Thompson needed someone to step up like that. That was massive. And then defensive player of the game, I'm going with Deshaun Amos. I know Wyndham McManus, had he not received like 5 other defensive players of the game so far this season, maybe I give it to him. I think if JB is on with us today, Probably JB gives it to Wyndham McManus, and I give it to Mechie, simply because he was asked to do things that he hasn't really been asked to do all season. This is what I was talking about before, where he was being asked to come down into, not quite into the box, but coming down into the underneath hole, trying to help out wherever he could with the young middle linebackers who the coaches clearly wanted to focus on stopping the run, not on just taking 2 read steps and bailing out. Enoch Mwamba is a wizard at that. I did talk about that in my film piece this past week when I was looking at Wyndham McManus being able to diagnose run or pass so quickly, and you see him take his 2 read steps and then bail out at an extremely high rate. That's a skill. It's really hard to do. And to expect Cassar and Hoyt to come in there and be able to do that at the level that Mwamba and McManus can is just unrealistic. It's not going to happen. And so it looked like the coaches had said to those young linebackers, when you're in at MAC, you stop the run. You worry about the run. We'll worry about the pass behind you. And that's where they had Royce Mechie come in and sort of play this sort of Tampa 2 look where Mechie is playing that underneath hole, crawling down from what would normally be for him deep middle. That's almost always what he's asked to cover when he's playing zone. So it was great to see him adjust to that, to come in and make 7 tackles, second on the team in tackles behind only Wyndham McManus. He deserves that for sure. And then the play of the game, there's so many ways we could go here, but I I think the play of the game has to be the touchdown to Curly Gittens Jr. I'm going to give an honorable mention to Coxie for that spectacular catch, spin, double stiff arm, staying in bounds somehow, and finally being pushed out at the 2. It was an incredible play. If Coxie doesn't make a mistake on that read route later in the game, maybe I'm not angry with him and I stick with him on that. But I think I'm going to give it to Curly Gittens Jr. With that touchdown pass. It was a spectacular individual effort. He ran a great route. He got open and just found a way to get the ball in the end zone when it looked like he was going to be stopped short. He just dug a little bit deeper, sprung forward, held that ball out. It looked like he might lose it for a second, but was able to keep a grip on that football and it crossed the goal line for the touchdown. So that is my play of the game. All right. We head into the bye week. We've got a little bit more normalcy coming up. We're not going to be doing podcasts from houseboats or hotels or anything like that for the next little while. We've got this bye week, and then we're back in Ottawa, and we'll actually be in Ottawa, and so that will be that'll be a much better situation. So you're not having to listen to me from a boat or a bar, and without JB. I know it's not the same doing this podcast without JB. I hate being without him. I don't think I've done a post game without him since 2019. So yeah, he is. Don't tell him that, but he's very much missed. I'm looking forward to hearing what he says I missed in that game, because I'm sure there were a ton of things, moments where the offense could have done something better. I don't even know how to extra this without saying so long for JB, so I'm just going to pretend that he's here and extra the normal way. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.